So Ruth, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Just two or three questions about how you engage with scripture, with the Bible. But let's just start with the question I've asked everybody. Part of the commitment as a member of the Iona community is to regular engagement with the Bible and with other material which nourishes us. Can you say a bit, Ruth, about what this part of the rule means to you and how you live it out? There might be a particular methodology you use or an approach or a passion that guides you.
Okay. I think for a long time, regular in my interpretation meant daily. So for a long time, it was sort of daily look at a few verses of the Bible with Bible reading notes. That doesn't seem to work for me anymore. But it did, at the time it did. It was appropriate and that was okay. Most of my engaging with the Bible now tends to happen through writing. Because I work with a group that writes material for churches and it's lectionary based. So obviously it's always ongoing with the biblical passages. And the process for that is we meet together as a group and we have a sort of probably a 3 hours, no holds barred Bible study on the passages. So basically sort of throwing them around between us and what our interpretations are, and we often don't agree. But it's a very good exercise for sort of exploring scripture. When we finish that, we go away and we write on our own, and then it gets given into an editor. But the actual process of doing it together as a group and notes from that, I find very helpful when we're doing it. It helps me, it triggers things in me that I might not have thought of if I was doing it on my own. So in terms of writing on my own, the way I write, and I'll say a bit more about that later, is that if it's a biblical passage, I will read the passage out loud to myself, maybe once or twice, and then I'll leave it for a couple of days, because somehow or other it wanders around my mind and I come back into it. So when I come back to actually writing, probably Ignatian method is the thing that would go most.
Okay.
I would try and think myself into the story and look at the story from various different perspectives. So I'm sometimes writing as a tree or as an animal or as a character in the story. At one point as a stone on the ground that wanted to shout out loud, various things.
I love that, the idea of you being a tree and a stone and really walking from inside the text out the way. Yeah. And it sounds like for you, the collaborative approach to, working with the group and doing the collective Bible study triggers a whole lot of other creative ideas that may not otherwise have emerged. Would that be right?
Yeah, and I'm one of the story writers in the group. As a group, some people write the Bible notes, some people write activities, games, prayers, all sorts of other things. But those of us who are the story writers, and it's me and another member of the Iona community, who I know you're also going to talk to, is one of the story writers as well. So we're the ones who would engage more, I think, with the text all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks for that. And that's a beautiful illustration of how you engage with the Bible, and you've freed yourself from the scourge of daily, which maybe worked for you for a while, but then you've moved into a different rhythm that works for you now. Another question which is really related to this is, are there specific lenses, as an Iona community member, are there specific lenses through which you read the Bible or look at scripture?
Yeah, I think there's a number. I think one of the lenses would be being a woman. I think I'm just, given my history with the church over the last 50, 60 years, I'm very aware that, as far as we know, the Bible was written by, translated by, decided how much people were going to know about it by men. It was basically men who controlled the way that the women heard the Bible. So if I'm looking at the Bible now, I'll almost look for the gaps. I'll look for the stories that haven't been recorded but were obviously there. Things like, what was Isaac's mother doing when Jacob was happily taking him up the mountain, and things like that. Mm-hmm. And also the stories that we have got and how they're told as well. So yeah, I think that would be one lens that I think that would be quite strong for me. And I think, within the community, I'm not the only one who's looking through that lens either. I think,
sure.
Yeah. I'd look through the lens of social justice. I think, having spent most of my working life in inner city areas, phrases like bias to the poor are very much part of who I am. So I would be familiar with passages in the Bible that are about social justice and those. Yeah, one that was interesting for me was I heard a lecture a couple of years ago about Norman Nicholson, who's a Cumbrian poet.
Yeah,
You heard of?
yeah,
Okay.
I've heard of him, yeah.
Right, well, he was Methodist, and the person who was giving the lecture said that when he was growing up, and probably throughout most of his adult life, the thing that was really important for him in forming his theology was the Methodist hymn book. And when I think about, it would have been the equivalent of the Anglican prayer book or the Westminster Confession or whatever. I grew up within Methodism as well. And I think, the theology of the hymns is probably a lens I look through. And like a lot of the theology in the hymns, I don't agree with anymore, but it's always there. So when I look at something, I think that lens is always there. I think the other lens, probably as an older person, I'd look at scripture reflecting back on my own experience. And, the Bible's got a fair amount to say about older age. So interesting to look at that as well.
That's a good selection of lenses, Ruth. And just the fact that we do read the Bible through lenses, whether we like it or not, we don't really have a choice. We always look through some lens, and it's just worth knowing what those lenses are, and how much influence we have over them. As you know, the Iona community in its beginnings didn't look through anything through the lens of the woman's voice, because it was a male only community for a very long time. So, we have grown and changed as an organization, and now we look at our faith through the lens of people from a whole range of denominations. We look at scripture through the lens of people who are transgender, who are gay, who are lesbian, who are living through multiple different life experiences, different ages. It's really helpful to think about what are the lenses that we choose to look through the gospel at.
Well, I think we always choose them. I think they're sometimes there in our experience of how we've grown up or whatever. And I think it's just being aware of them, because if you're not, they can over-influence,
That's
how
right.
you're looking.
Yeah. And my last question, Ruth, is about your role as one of the most prolific editors and writers that the Wild Goose Publications / Iona Community has. You edit liturgical material mostly for Wild Goose Publications. Can you say a bit about how you go about the process of writing and of gathering liturgical material, and the impact that this has on your daily life, particularly as a member of the Iona community and in your engagement with scripture?
Yeah, okay. I've published a lot of books. There's 2 series that go through the lectionary year. And then there are things that are specific, like there's one about sort of death and dying. There's 2 books on the Old Testament. So there's a whole mixture of things that either I've chosen or people have asked me for. So in terms of selecting what we're going to look at a book, the material for, those are the things that have, it's either come from somebody else or it's somewhere where I've seen a gap in resources that, we're able to fill as a community. I think the thing that influenced me most was I worked with Kathy Galloway years ago on putting together the pattern of all our days. She had a group of 6 of us. And again, she'd asked for material for that. And then 6 of us looked at it. It was laid out on an old youth camp table in her living room. I remember it distinctly. But that was where I learned the trade, in a sense, of, asking for and then sourcing it into categories and all the rest of it, the whole process of making the book. So that's the level I came in at. The other thing that's made it possible for me to be an editor is computers. My English grammar is terrible. My typing is very slow. My handwriting is awful. A computer can help me sort all of that. So, yeah, I think those 2 things have been affected me coming into it. In terms of the process, I decide on a topic first and then explore it, because I always send people a brief when I ask for material. So if it was, at the moment I'm working on a book called Autumn, which is for August, September and October. So I will have looked at things like harvest and creation time. I will have looked which are the saints' days that come in during that period. I might ask people to look at the lectionary, and if they've got any biblical material in those passages, to send me that. So I will send out a brief, and I will ask for it on the Iona Community website, but I will also ask all the people who've contributed in the past. I suspect between Neil and myself, we've probably got a sort of list of about 200 contributors. Not all, mostly have some connection with the community, but often when I send something out asking, people will say, can I share this with so-and-so who I know is a writer? And the answer is always yes. So,
you mean Neil Painter, the Wild Goose Pub's editor, when you mentioned, Neil, between you and Neil, you've got about 200 writers. It's incredible, the spread and the breadth. And you've also mentioned the lectionary a few times. In a sense, that sounds like a real anchor for you, that it's a framework on which the whole world really looks at scripture. How important is the lectionary for you in the work you do?
I think when if I'm doing something that's related to within time, it's very important. One of the problems about writing to the lectionary is you're never living in the time that you're writing. So, it may be Lent and you're happily writing material for harvest. And, it sometimes all gets a bit confusing. I think the lectionary is a framework for a lot of people, but even when I've got a lectionary-based book, there will be things in it that aren't in the lectionary. Like the autumn one at the moment, interestingly, has thrown up a whole chunk of writing about blackberries and conkers. Well, they certainly don't come within the lectionary, but the way people reflect on them, it does on that. So I think that's good. Once I've got the material, I will put it into chapters the best I can, and then it goes to Neil, but then it comes back to me. There's a whole process of emails back and forth until we get there. Yeah. Is it worth me saying what I look for when I ask people for stuff?
Yeah, thanks.
Basically, if it's for liturgy, I would expect it to be able to be read out loud easily. So no words that are difficult to pronounce or sentences that go on forever, things like that. And the other thing, I suppose, is that it's clear on the first reading, because within liturgy, people only tend to hear it. They may not even have the words in front of them. So there, obviously there are poems and stuff that can go into other categories. But if you're thinking about liturgy and responses and prayers, if people aren't going to have the text, they need to, the way they'll hear it is being read out loud. So read it out loud to yourself and get the feel of it, I would say to people on that. And I've got a thing about stuff, the reading age of stuff. Like a lot of the stuff I've produced can be read by children. And interestingly, when we were working on the Abbey prayer book, I wrote an all-age version of the morning service. And the feedback we got from that was, yes, children appreciated it, but people whose for whom English wasn't their first language also appreciated it, because there wasn't the complication of, complicated ideas. So it spoke to them. So I think that's important as well. I do a fair amount of all age material because there's not so much of that around. A lot of what is around is either just for children or for adults with, degree level and above.
So coming to worship with the spirit of a child, I think you're illustrating exactly why that's so crucial and why that's such a gift to us. Thank you for that, Ruth, and thank you for all these reflections. Good luck with the autumn book, and thank you.
Maybe the other thing that I haven't said to you is that you said reflect on how it affects my daily life.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think for me it gives it some structure, having to meet deadlines and work on material. But I think for me, writing's almost been a calling. I've only done it since I was in my 50s. But I'm fairly clear that's what I'm meant to be doing. So in a sense, writing and editing actually keeps me close to God in a way. Other things do too, but it's one of the ways that it does that.
That's a beautiful, beautiful image. And the fact that it's kind of taking you by surprise at a stage in your life when other things might have been more prominent, but this has become your calling, your vocation. And certainly I know that across the world, people appreciate and are grateful that that's the fact. Thank you, Ruth, so much.
You're welcome.